Chapter 1. It was a night cloaked in a suffocating silence, broken only by the occasional crackle of the fire as it devoured the last remnants of the day. The old house, with its crooked walls and peeling paint, stood in defiance against the encroaching darkness. Inside, the air was thick with the smell of burnt wood and something else, something rancid that hung in the corners of the room like a specter waiting to be acknowledged. Henry and Margaret sat across from each other, their faces illuminated by the flickering flames. Tension coiled around them like a serpent, each heartbeat echoing in the stillness. Their son Alex was supposed to return from a friend's house any minute, but as the clock ticked on, anxiety began to gnaw at them. "Do you think he's okay?" Margaret asked, her voice barely a whisper. She glanced toward the window, the darkness outside pressing against the glass like a living entity, eager to slip inside. "He's fine," Henry replied, though doubt crept into his mind. Kids are resilient. They lose track of time. But deep down, he felt the weight of something ominous. The townsfolk spoke in hushed tones about the old man who lived at the edge of the forest. A hermit, they called him. He was said to possess strange artifacts, things that twisted fate itself. One of them was a monkey's paw, rumored to grant 3 wishes, but at a terrible, bloody cost. Henry had always dismissed those tales as the ramblings of superstitious fools. And yet, as the shadows deepened, the air grew heavy with an unshakable dread. Chapter 2. The door creaked open and a gust of wind swept through the room, extinguishing the fire. Margaret gasped, clutching her chest. "Henry!" she cried, her voice trembling as she fumbled for the matches. "I'm here," he soothed, but his heart raced as he scrambled to relight the flame. Just then, the door swung wide, and Alex stumbled in, soaked to the bone, eyes wide with terror. "What happened?" Henry demanded, rushing to his son's side. "Dad, there was a thing in the woods," Alex stammered, breathless. "It was watching me. I swear it had these twisted limbs and eyes like coals. I ran, but it followed me." "Stop it!" Margaret shouted, her voice breaking. "You're scaring me." "I'm not lying," he insisted, his voice cracking. "It wanted something. I could feel it." Henry exchanged a worried glance with Margaret, who was pale as a ghost. "There's nothing out there, son. You just had a fright." But even as he spoke, doubt clawed at his insides. He had heard the murmurs, seen the fear in the eyes of their neighbors. "Maybe we should check the perimeter," he suggested, trying to sound brave. Chapter 3. They stepped outside, the chill of the night wrapping around them like a shroud. The moon cast long shadows that danced and flickered, blurring the line between reality and nightmare. As they walked, Alex's eyes darted about nervously. "It's out there. I know it is," he whispered, his voice trembling as they reached the edge of the woods. "Stay close," Henry ordered, though he could feel the unease gnawing at him. They stepped into the underbrush, the crunch of twigs beneath their feet reverberating in the stillness. And then they heard it, a low guttural growl that sent chills racing down their spines. "Run!" Henry shouted, grabbing Alex's arm. They sprinted back towards the house, the air thick with the scent of decay. But as they reached the door, it slammed shut in their faces. "Mom!" Henry yelled, desperate. But when he turned back, Margaret was gone. "Mom!" Alex screamed, terror etched on his face. Chapter 4. The darkness closed in around them, swallowing their cries. The growling grew louder, more insistent, as though it were relishing their fear. Henry felt a wave of hopelessness crash over him as he fumbled with the door, but it wouldn't budge. "Where is she?" he shouted, panic clawing at his throat. "She was right here," Alex sobbed, and that's when they heard the laughter. It was a deep, mocking cackle that echoed through the trees, sending shivers down their spines. Shadows swirled around them, contorting into grotesque shapes as if the very night had come alive to consume them. "Back away," Henry ordered, pulling Alex close. But the shadows lunged, slicing through the air with razor-like precision. "Dad, please!" Alex cried, and Henry's heart shattered as he heard the sickening crunch of bone. "No!" he roared, but it was too late. Alex fell, the ground soaking up blood, and Henry could only stand there, frozen in horror as the darkness enveloped him. Chapter 5. When the dawn broke, it revealed a scene of utter devastation. The old house stood silent, a crumbling monument to despair. Inside, Henry stirred, his body racked with agony as he crawled toward the remnants of his family. Margaret, Alex, he gasped, but his voice echoed back at him, mocking him. In the corner of the room lay the monkey's paw, its fingers curled tightly, as if clenching the remnants of their shattered lives. Wish for them back, a voice whispered, slithering into his mind like a snake. He hesitated, terrified of the price he would have to pay. But the aching void in his chest burned, the desperation clawing at his sanity. Bring them back, he finally whispered, a sob escaping his lips. The room trembled, shadows swirling around him as the paw twisted and writhed. Chapter 6. The air grew thick with an unbearable stench, a rancid odor that clawed at his throat. And then he heard it, soft shuffling footsteps. Dad, a voice called, but it was wrong. It was hollow, echoing with an unnatural timbre. Margaret, he rasped, hope flaring briefly before being snuffed out. The door creaked open, and there stood Margaret, her eyes vacant, skin stretched tight over bone. You wished for us back, Henry, she said, her voice dripping with malice. I didn't mean it like this, he stammered, backing away. But it was too late. The shadows coalesced and Alex followed, his once bright eyes now black and soulless. We're home now, Dad, Alex said, a cruel grin stretching across his face, revealing teeth that were sharp and glistening with blood. Henry screamed, but the sound echoed back at him, swallowed by the darkness. In that twisted moment, he realized the truth. He had opened a door that should have remained closed, and as the shadows closed in around him, he understood the finality of his wish. Darkness seeped into his soul, and the last thing he saw was their twisted forms, a grotesque parody of the family he once knew, until everything faded to black. The house stood silent once more, a monument to despair, waiting patiently for the next fool to tempt fate.